Seek recognition.
I rise in support of the amendment.
Will the gentleman yield briefly?
The gentleman has the time. Does the gentleman wish to yield to Mr.
Will the gentleman yield briefly?
Yes.
The important thing is that Bill Clinton lied to a grand jury. That is a crime. The article of impeachment that passed the House accused Bill Clinton of lying to a grand jury, a crime and something that obstructs the ability of the courts to get to the truth. This is not what is happening here. Big difference.
Thank you. Reclaiming my time.
Gentleman reclaims his time.
It is interesting, though. We're here because of fraud, not by the president, but from within the Department of Justice. And I realize people on the other side of the aisle have been so busy trying to find some kind of charge, criminal charge to bring against the president, none of which worked, that they may not have been aware of the most recent Horowitz report. But it is clear now, that the whole investigation that has brought us here with crime after crime being alleged and then having to be dropped was a fraudulent effort before the FISA court to have a surveillance warrant done against Carter Page. They lied initially, said that he was a Russian agent when actually he had been used by the CIA as a spy against Russia. And so they lied, it was fraudulent, and there hopefully will be people that will answer for their crimes and their fraud in the Department of Justice in the days to come, and it sounds like that should be the case. And there was fraud all the way through, but for 3 years we had been hearing about the crimes of the candidate Trump and then the crimes of President Trump, and we come now today based on the initial fraud that got this whole impeachment stuff started, and no one on the other side is willing to acknowledge the fraud that brought us here, nor the fact that so many people here have been screaming about the president's crimes, and we're even hearing today, like we just did, oh yes, there were crimes. Well, then why aren't they in this impeachment document? It's because they don't exist. They've been disproven over and over and over again, and that's why the gentleman's amendment is so well taken. You don't want to go down this ground. I think it's a bad idea when it was proposed before. High crimes and misdemeanors, if it's not treason, right? Even misdemeanors are crimes. And so we've had to drop the fraud of all the crimes being alleged, people saying in here and in the public, gee, we're going to get the president because he colluded with Russia. How terrible was that? Well, that's all been disproved and dropped. So now we were left with bribery and extortion, and now those had to be dropped because there were no crimes. And I appreciate the gentleman bringing up crimes, but those are not alleged here. And so let me just say, this is a day that will live in infamy for the Judiciary Committee. The days of exemplary chairs like Daniel Webster when he stood for principle, those are going to be gone because this became a tool of the majority to try to use taxpayer funds to defeat a president. And by the way, the Ken Starr report, 36 boxes, he came in and testified. We were kept out of hearing the witnesses. There were, in the Watergate, these witnesses testified on television. It was public. It was not a star chamber like the Schiff chamber became. And I would like to yield back the remainder of my time to my friend, Mr. Jordan.
Well, I would just say, when did it happen? Everything Mr. Swalwell just said, if it all happened, why isn't it in the resolution? Democrats say there's some scheme to have an announcement made by President Zelensky to get a phone call with the president, to get a meeting with the president, and to get the aid released. When did the announcement happen? They got the call on July 25th. They got the meeting on September 25th. They got the money on September 11th. There was never an announcement from the Ukrainians to do an investigation. So you can keep saying all this stuff and all the points that this happened. Didn't happen, not the facts. Those are not the facts. And we know why the aid ultimately got released, because we learned that this guy, this new president, was actually the transformer, the real deal, was actually going to deal with the corruption issue in his country. That's what happened. You can make up all the things you want, but those are not the facts.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does Mr. Jeffries seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized.
Let's actually go through the facts. We're here today because the president abused his power. We're here today because he solicited foreign interference in the 2020 election. He had welcomed foreign interference as it relates to Russia. He solicited foreign interference on the White House lawn with China, and he did it with Ukraine. He's a serial solicitor. Let's go through the facts. Congress allocated $391 million in military aid on a bipartisan basis to Ukraine, currently at war with Russian-backed separatists in the east. Ukraine's a friend, Russia's a foe. Ukraine's a democracy, Russia's a dictatorship. The United States is probably the only thing standing between Vladimir Putin and Ukraine being completely overrun as part of Putin's fantasy to reconstruct the Soviet Union, which would be adverse to the national security interests of the United States. And every single fact witnessed before this Congress said so. You can't even dispute that. So we allocated aid on a bipartisan basis. But then the aid was withheld. So the American people deserve to figure out why. In February, there was a letter sent by the Trump administration saying, okay, the aid is on the way. But it never arrived. In April, he had a phone call, the president, with Zelensky. The word corruption was not mentioned once. And then, in May, the Department of Defense wrote to this Congress and said, all necessary preconditions for the receipt of the aid have been met by the new Ukrainian government, including the implementation of anti-corruption protocols. We have that letter. It was sent to you and it was sent to us. Then in July, on the 18th, at an Office of Management and Budget meeting, the aid was officially frozen at the direction of the president. Twice during the summer, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican majority leader, publicly stated he called the Trump administration, what happened to the aid? Mitch McConnell couldn't get a good answer because there was no good answer. Then on July 25th, there's another call between President Trump and President Zelensky. The word corruption is not mentioned once, but here's what was said. Zelensky talks about defense, and the immediate response is, do us a favor, though. And President Trump says, I need you to look into some things, not related to procurement of defense arms, but related to a wild conspiracy theory connected to the 2016 campaign, and also says, I want you to look into Joe Biden. And then what's interesting, since you think it was such a perfect call, he mentions Rudolph Giuliani. I'm looking at the transcript right now. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Why on an official call would the president mention Rudolph Giuliani? He's not an ambassador. He's not the Secretary of State. He's not a member of the diplomatic corps. He's President Trump's political enforcer. And then what happens? You said you want to talk about the facts. In August, Giuliani travels to Madrid and meets with the Ukrainian government as a follow-up to Trump saying to Ukraine, go meet with Giuliani. And then a statement is drafted about this phony investigation and sent to the Ukrainians. But what happens? In August, the whistleblower complaint is filed. Then on September 9th, the whistleblower complaint is made public to Congress. 2 days later, on September 11th, all of a sudden, the aid is released. Why was the aid released? Because the president was caught red-handed, trying to pressure a foreign government to target an American citizen. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Gates seek recognition?
Strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
There were 5 meetings that we have detailed that show why the aid was released. There was a belief on the administration previously that Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in the world, that they had not engaged in sufficient reforms. And after a number of events with the vice president, with a bipartisan Senate delegation, there was a resolution of that aid. But this debate just lacks a certain sincerity. I heard earlier my friend from California, Mr. Swalwell, say, list out all these crimes. And so if I'm watching at home, I'm thinking, well, where are they in the impeachment? That is just a Democrat drive-by, to go and list crimes that you don't allege and that you don't have evidence for. If there is ever a microcosm of how to consume this day and the importance of it with the American people, it's that they're naming crimes in debate that they don't even have in their impeachment resolution because they can't prove them, because there are no underlying facts. And then I hear my friend from New York, Mr. Jeffries, bring up Russia. Russia, the residue of impeachment theories passed and failed. How are we even here debating about military aid, javelins, that President Trump delivered, that President Obama withheld? I hear them, crying these alligator tears, clutching their pearls over this notion that, Trump didn't give this aid, we got to go impeach him for it. Where was all this concern about how to make the Ukraine great again when Obama was president? You want to know our substantive defense? It's 4 things. They've never changed. I think Mr. Jordan dreams of them in his sleep. Both President Trump and President Zelensky said there was no pressure. We saw the call transcript, and there's no conditionality. There was never awareness on the part of the Ukraine that there was a delay in aid, and the Ukraine got the aid without opening the investigation that seems to be so troubling to Democrats. Everything you're going to hear them say today can be pretty much categorized into 3 areas. First, it's either stuff people presumed and had no direct evidence of, kind of their water cooler theory of the case. Second, it's hearsay. Somebody told somebody else that created some concern about the president's conduct. Or it is reflective of a sincere policy disagreement about how to make the Ukraine great again. I mean, I heard all these folks come by that are part of the diplomatic corps, and they sure seem to believe that we ought to do everything for the Ukraine, but if the president disagrees with that, it is not impeachable conduct. Essentially, they're alleging a shakedown. But I think most Americans know that you cannot have a shakedown if the person allegedly being shook down doesn't even know about the shakedown. You have President Zelensky himself saying, I felt no pressure. And then, talk about bad timing. We got this Time article that comes out on the 10th of December, just a few days ago, because their theory of the case is, well, even if Zelensky didn't know there was pressure, there's this other guy, Yermak. And Yermak knew from Gordon Sondland that there was pressure, but the same day that they introduced their articles of impeachment, Yermak gives this interview with Time magazine, and he says, and I quote, Gordon and I were never alone together. We bumped into each other in the hallway next to the escalator as I was walking out. And I remember everything. It's fine with my memory. We talked about how well the meeting went. That is all we talked about. So here they are, with no crime, with no victim, with no witnesses, with no knowledge of any shakedown, and yet they proceed. To accept the Democrats' theory of the case, you got to believe that the Ukrainians are lying to us. You got to believe when they say there's no conditionality, no pressure, nothing wrong, that they're so weak and they're so dependent on the United States that we can't believe a word they say. Well, again, where were you during the Obama administration when this weak ally didn't get javelins that were then withheld? I support the Jordan Amendment because this Article 1, this abuse of power that they allege in the impeachment theory, is a total joke. They have to say abuse of power because they don't have evidence for obstruction. They have to say abuse of power because they have no evidence for bribery or treason. They have to say abuse of power because all those specific crimes that the gentleman from California named